The moon is out, the time is right to watch Dating with Demoldey tonight. The Sopranos are here, Carmela and Tony, it's Mafia Week. On Dating with Demoldey, Demoldey grants your dating wishes. Click away, you'll be swimming with the fishes. So get your popcorn, your soda pop, Dating with Demoldey. Don't you stop.
All right, so now we're on to theme number 3, which is parenting. So not every single relationship is going to have this as a factor, but a lot of, and not every single marriage is going to have children as a factor. But in The Sopranos, Tony and Carmela definitely are affected by their children. As much as they are a couple, they are parents. They are a mom and a dad. They are a mother and a father to two children. And we see it kind of throughout the series. Some seasons it's more of an issue than others. Others, you rarely really see AJ, or you rarely see Meadow having any storylines at all. But it's a pretty prominent theme within The Sopranos is their family and all the things that happen in it. So I broke down this theme into kind of some sub-themes or motifs, if you will, some thematic ideas. That being, number 1, a united front. Number 2, conflict resolution. Number 3, life transitions / I guess guiding principles, if you will. Number 4, discipline. And number 5, sweet moments and love. So basically, looking at all 5 of these, and I might get into a 6, I don't know, but having a united front essentially means being on the same page. Being on the same page about decisions for the family, being united in the fact that they are equals in their home. No one has more power than the other. They are equal. They are also on each other's side. It's a big thing. Conflict resolution, as we talked about before, is just how do you handle conflict? How do you solve problems? And we see them both do so in healthy and very unhealthy ways. Number 3, life transitions / like guiding principles. This one really goes into kind of just how the two deal with their kids growing up. The fact that their kids are getting older, they're going out into the lives. I mean, we see AJ go from a little snotty little kid to a man, a grown man, in the span of the series. So that's a huge thing that they go through. Same thing with Meadow. Meadow, she was in high school. She was already kind of adulting, but you see her also transition from, mature right in front of their eyes. So that's a big thing is how do they guide their children? How do they, kind of shape their children to be adults, to grow? How do they develop them, right? Number 4, discipline. A big part of the show is discipline, and when your kids, because kids are going to get in trouble, kids are going to make mistakes, kids are they're gonna mess up. That is a part of life. So a huge part of The Sopranos is how Carmela and Tony in their marriage deal with these mistakes. How do they handle when their kids mess up? So we'll get into that. That's a majority of the series, to be honest. It's just disciplining their kids. And then 5 also, sweet moments. There's plenty of them throughout the show. Plenty of sweet moments where, and this is kind of going back to what I said earlier of what makes Tony such a easy person to root for, because there are plenty of sweet moments, but it makes it hard when there's all these other really negative moments. So it makes him a really conflicting, very complex character. Hard to root for in certain regards, but also you want to root for him because of these sweet, really, it's really sweet moments. So we'll get into those. So first, let's just talk about the United Front thing. I mean, we see this throughout the series where both of them are, sometimes they're on different pages, right? So like Tony, very old school, very traditional sort of person, has his own style. This kind of goes into the disciplines part, but it's kind of throughout where you see, mainly with AJ, right? You kind of see it a little bit with Meadow, where Carmela and Tony are on different pages in terms of like discipline, or they go into the school office because AJ just gets disciplined all the time, and they kind of are on two different wavelengths, and so that definitely impacts their marriage, because when you aren't on the same page, you have conflict, and you're figuring out who's going to lead, who's going to step back. So we see that throughout, where Carmela wants a more hardline approach, and Tony kind of lets AJ off easy. And and of course, a big issue with them too is the way that they interact with each other isn't necessarily always healthy. Where she says, "Oh, like a united front would have been nice in there," or she makes like some snide comments and stuff, and so that's a big thing. Is some of these like little snide remarks, and you see it a lot that they just have differing views on parenting, and you got to wonder what the conversations were like before they had kids. Did they view raising children the same way? Because it appears that Carmela, at least for the most part, is pretty strict in the way that they want to parent, and Tony maybe a little bit more lackadaisical. So you got to wonder if that was something that maybe should have been discussed before they had kids. All right, so number 2, conflict resolution. So this in specific is how Carmela and Tony handle conflict within the parental subsystem, as they say, within them two, about their kids. So basically, we see this plenty of times where they argue about the direction for their children. Kind of go back to the whole united front thing, where they don't really see eye to eye on things happening with the kids. And so I guess there's positives and negatives. They have, we've talked about this in some of the past videos, that like relationships are won and lost in the bedroom, right? The bedroom conversations are huge. They're an insanely important part of any relationship. That's where, these nighttime conversations, the pillow talk, as they say, like that's where it's most intimate. That's where you see a lot of growth, a lot of like connection, is when you're in bed talking about your day, talking about life. And that's where we see it in The Sopranos mainly. The bedtime combos is where Carmela and Tony really do connect. And that, it's when they have conversations there, I'd say that's probably their healthiest space is the bedroom. You see Tony kind of, give in. You see Tony, be more understanding, be a little bit softer. Their conversations at in the kitchen, however, those can be very volatile. Those are not ideal. In terms of the conflict resolution, so like when they differ on their opinions for their children, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. You also see Tony take matters into his own hands a lot when it comes to like even Meadow's soccer coach, right? Like going out of his way to threaten him, and Tony or Paulie goes over to the guy's house and drops a TV off, right? Like there's plenty of like manipulative things that happen with them in regards to their children that isn't super ideal. Same thing with when they're in their whole separation thing, right? Like using like the fights that they have with AJ, not like with him, but about him, are not the greatest, right? Like they're kind of using him as a pawn and throwing jabs at each other. Oh, well, you wanna stay with your father, go ahead, right? Like you'll see how you like it over there. Like he's a slob, blah blah blah. So yeah, at times their communication can be better. I mean, you see it throughout the series, and we'll talk about it here. But they are very snide and sarcastic, and kind of hurtful. That's just kind of the way they talk to each other. Whether that's a cultural thing, but probably there's a big factor in that. But I think some of their communication to each other could be healthier. It definitely could be healthier. So, something to watch out for when your parents is like, how do you communicate to each other in front of your children? Because that is how, I mean, monkey see, monkey do, right? Like a lot of the way that children act is based on how you act. How does any kid understand how the world works, how relationships work, how marriages work? It's through your marriage. So that's something that they really do struggle with is the disrespectful communication, the snide remarks. And you see AJ mouths off all the time. And Meadow certainly has a smart mouth too, not very polite at times as well. So I think that their conflict resolution amongst themselves isn't always the best, but not horrendous. And I do think that their bedtime conversations are pretty good. So anyway, transitioning now to number 3, life transition / guidance. This is a pretty big theme throughout. Is the fact that you see it almost towards the end. Like AJ still lives there. He doesn't like move out. But that's, every marriage goes through these life cycles. Every person in life goes through a life cycle. Childhood, adolescence, adulthood, late adulthood. Getting older, like when they're in their 80s, all that stuff. Like every psychologist has nicknamed these stages of life, to different themes or whatever, right? The one that we see with Tony and Carmela, they're verge empty nesters, right? Like, their kids are teenagers, and they're kind of pushing them into life. They're launching them, right? They're like the mama bird and the little baby bird's like, go fly, be free, all that stuff, right? So that's the stage they're in. And you kind of see this contrast between Meadow and AJ, where Meadow, and this is said a lot by Tony, whether it's privately or publicly, like whether it's privately with his wife or his friends or Melfi, Dr. Melfi, or he even says it out loud, right? About how different Meadow and AJ are. And Tony resents his son a little bit because his son reminds him of him. It reminds him of himself. And how much he doesn't like himself and some of these qualities. The fact that they both have this hereditary thing which causes them to have panic attacks. He really dislikes that because we see AJ also have panic attacks. Meanwhile, you see Meadow as kind of the golden child, right? And she's not, but she goes to college. She's super smart, capable. She gets a job at a law center and living in New York and being a big girl, all that stuff, right? And so it definitely plays a impact on the family unit as a whole. So with that said, there's such a juxtaposition. There's such a difference between the two because AJ, throughout the series, is getting into trouble. He's not very smart. He doesn't try a lot in school. He's not. He doesn't really work hard. Kind of goofs off. Has these friends that are bad influences. Constantly getting into trouble. Just being an overall menace. And so, whereas you see that a little bit from Meadow, but not nearly as bad, right? And so that's something for them to navigate. With Meadow, there's this whole thing of like, oh yeah, like she takes after her mother, right? Like, she's the smart one. And so sometimes that language comes out publicly, and you hear Tony say the line to his son, like, "This is my male heir. Like, this is my like, how can I be happy when this is my son?" Like, really cutting and mean things to say about your child, right? So mean, just so mean. And that's an issue, is that Tony and Carmela really don't know how to handle AJ, because he acts up constantly. He is messing up constantly. I don't think he gets better at all throughout the series. He's continuously like showing that he's not where he needs to be, and so they just don't know how to handle it. They don't know what to do. I don't blame them. I'm not sure if I even have all the answers quite yet, but we see that with AJ, where he's just not getting better, and they didn't really expect that. They didn't really expect him to behave the way he does, because Meadow was such a good kid relatively, right? So we see a lot throughout the series within their marriage, just of like, how do we deal with these kids growing up and getting agency, right? Like, talking with my dad, I asked him something like, when was the best time of being a dad or something like that, or being a parent? And he said, honestly, when you guys were like 4 to like 6 years old. And I was like, okay, why is that? He's like, oh, well, you were old enough to like do things on your own, so I didn't need to like take care of you, but you also didn't talk back. And you just like came along for the ride and did whatever I asked you. And I'm like, yeah. So we had independent, we were able to do stuff, but we didn't have like any agency. So, we had agency, I guess. Like, we could make our own, like, we could do our own actions. We didn't need help, but we also didn't have our own independent thought where we could think for ourselves and do things for ourselves, I guess. Anyway, so we kind of see that. We see them struggle with that. And especially with AJ, because you see Tony, like, see his son, like, he's on a chat room on his computer, and you just see this, like, look of resentment. I think he even says that to Melfi, like, I hate my son, or something like that. There's a lot of expectations put upon AJ, too, to be this man, and Tony knows that his son isn't that way. Like, he knows that his son is so drastically different. Like, he admits, like, there's no way that his son could be a gangster like him. And so that definitely rubs off on AJ. I mean, we talk a lot about this in class, about intergenerational patterns, things that are transferred from generation to generation. For example, the hereditary, the panic attacks, right? That's passed down. But there's also like expectations and behaviors that are passed down. For example, like Tony's dad, Johnny Boy, right? Like Johnny Soprano. He was a mobster, he was a gangster, and then Tony follows in the father's footsteps, does the same thing. And there's kind of this expectation a little bit that AJ is going to do the same. But Tony knows that his son's not cut out for that. But at the same time, he doesn't like prevent it. And you kind of see it that AJ is starting to kind of become like Tony. The way that he rips off the people at the party, right, where he throws a party and charges kids for beer, and also gets violent. You talk about violence, like him and his friends, beating up kids and putting acid on their kids' toes and all that sort of stuff. AJ maybe doesn't participate, but he also doesn't stop it. He's not like an innocent kid by any stretch. And he also does bad things, stealing wine, acting up. And you got to figure a big part of that is because of Tony. Sometimes Tony isn't home. He's not a very good role model. There's this kind of underlying knowledge that Tony commits crimes. Tony does bad things. And like I said, monkey see, monkey do, right? So AJ, he wants to impress his dad. And you also see that when AJ tries to kill Uncle June. He brings a knife and he says, well, like, you're a hypocrite. I was going to kill him just like the way that, they did in The Godfather. And you said that was sick. And Tony says, you're going to make me cry. Like, that's what you got out of the movie? It's a movie. So I think, like, that scene kind of encapsulates, like, their relationship where AJ doesn't know who to be. He doesn't know what his identity is. Because he knows in his heart that he's not Tony, but he still kind of tries, and thinks that, like, this must be the way because that's what my dad did. And there's this huge reputation, right, that we see throughout where, AJ is like, oh, like, I'm Tony Soprano's kid. And he can never really get out of that shadow. So, needless to say, I could go off on a tangent about AJ, but it affects the marriage for sure. In that, like, Carmela, kind of blames Tony a little bit for the way that AJ acts. Because, she says, oh, well, like, he's your son. He's, it's chip off the old block sort of thing. But she has just as much to do with it too. Like, they're two parents. They have to work together, and sometimes you don't see it. You don't see that in United Front, like I mentioned earlier. Tony letting him off the hook, and it puts Carmela in a bad position too, where she has to be the bad guy. And that's kind of what I was going to mention earlier with the discipline. We'll get to that in discipline. I think we see throughout that sometimes Carmela and Tony aren't prepared for the transitions that their kids take in life. Where, things were so easy with Meadow, and they're going to be different for AJ. And that's the thing. Parents think that every kid is the same. They think that they're going to grow up and develop the same because they're in the same environment, they're given the same food, same clothes, same whatever, but it's not. Every kid responds differently. That's the nature and nurture thing, right? And so we see it. I mean, Meadow is intelligent. She questions the world. She has her own kind of more liberal views, I guess you could say. And then you see AJ, who goes through this period of like, well, God doesn't exist. God's not real, all that stuff. And which it's a funny thing to watch happen. But yeah, I think they were caught off guard by their kids, having their own thoughts and feelings, and they just thought they were going to be, mini-me's or their little soldiers, or kind of do the things that they told them, and then they realized, like, oh wait, no, that's not how this works. So anyway, I think they were caught off a little off guard on how to handle it, and this happens to a lot of families. They don't really know what to expect when adolescence comes and kids start questioning the world and start coming up with these ideas of like God doesn't exist and blah 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 blah. So it's an interesting thing. I don't know if I have any comments on how they handled it per se. Like, I think it's hard to handle that either way. So, but it's just something to think about, something to come to the same page about, and have conversations about, like, hey, how do we handle this with our son? So anyway. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, I've kind of already got into it, but discipline is certainly a major factor in the way that Carmela and Tony interact. And man, it's not good. It's not good. It's not good at all. Firstly, as I mentioned, there is a lot of inconsistencies within Tony and Carmela's manner of discipline, right? We've got, number one, inconsistent themes and messages between the two, whether they want to be like a hard line or whether they want to be soft. What they say is like the healthiest way of parenting is this middle ground, right? Where you don't want to be too harsh, but you also don't want to be too forgiving. So within the psychological field, right, there's 4 types. So there's permissive and authoritarian. So permissive is high responsiveness but low demandingness. So you respond to everything. So like being permissive is where you let your kids basically like walk all over you, essentially. You give in everything they want. The kid basically does whatever they want. There's no rules. Lets the kid have all these unhealthy things like ice cream all the time, playing video games all the time, never going to school, never doing homework. Just, the kid basically leads, right? That's permissive. On the other side is authoritarian. So that is where the parents are insanely strict. They punish a lot. There's only one-way communication. There's very little back and forth. They don't really ask the kid what they need. They're just like, this is my house. These are my rules. You're going to do exactly as I say, when I say it. And if you don't, you will be punished. Which I'm sure a lot of kids can relate to. So it's high demanding and low responsiveness. So a kid could be really having issues, and the parent is just on them. Doesn't ask how they're doing. It's just going to expect them to get good grades, and that's it. And it's just very business-like, I guess you could say. Then there's another unhealthy one where it's in between the two. And this one can be just as harmful. It's called the neglectful parenting style, where or uninvolved, whatever you want to say. It's basically where the parent just does nothing. Now, they don't give the kid whatever, so they don't meet their needs at all. They don't give them whatever, but they also don't force them to do anything. So it's just you're just uninvolved. You neglect them. You don't give them hardly any food. Maybe you give them a little bit of food, but you don't give them ice cream. You don't give them, a lot of food or anything like that. You just give them the bare necessities. And then you don't really give them any emotional or behavioral kind of needs or expectations or anything like that. You're just kind of whatever. They're just someone living in my house. That's kind of the neglectful style. So you might ask, what's the best parenting style? As they have shown, it's authoritative. So it's not authoritarian, it's authoritative. So you work together with your child to, in everything. You have open communication. You have natural consequences. The rules are clear. The expectations are clear. And you solve problems with the child. You attune to their needs as needed. You don't give them more than they need. You don't spoil them, because that doesn't help anybody. But you help them to help themselves, essentially. And you're there, to talk and be emotionally open with them. But also, if they mess up, there's consequences, taking things away, not rewarding certain behavior. For the record, it's difficult to be authoritative. You got to strike a balance. It's different for every kid. It's different for every parent. Every family is different. It's hard, right? So, but this is the ideal, is to where you have a good balance of rules and fun. That's the key. Because you don't want too much of either way, where authoritarian, where your kid is fears you, where you can't be close, and where there is no love. There's just, you must do this, you must do that. You're an employee and I'm your employer, sort of thing, right? And you also don't want the permissive, where the kid walks all over the parents and they get whatever they want and they never learn responsibility or consequences. It's funny because I used to think why wouldn't parents just be permissive? But it's the same thing. As the old adage goes, you teach a kid to fish, he feeds himself forever. If you just give him a fish, you're not teaching him anything. And so I think that's the biggest thing for parents, is to teach their children how to do things, because that's the ultimate gift. Is I'm teaching you how to live. I'm not just giving you all, just giving you everything. That's not really love. But you do want to feed them and give them love. That's true, but you don't want to overindulge to where, you want them to be able to sustain themselves in the case that you die or you're gone. Impart them with lessons, all that stuff, right? So anyway, I guess the question could be, what sort of parenting style is Tony and Carmela? Oh, wow, it's a great question. To be honest, I think that wow, that's a great question. The issue is that they vacillate, I guess is the word, but they ping pong between the two all the time. I wouldn't call them authoritative. I would not call them that, right? So we see this combination of permissive and authoritarian, where Tony, very permissive, age, especially with AJ, does whatever he wants, and there's hardly any consequences. You see it with Meadow. The main thing she does wrong is when she trashes her grandma's house. So they have a huge party. There's like cops involved. Like someone goes to the hospital, and there's like drugs and stuff, and like puke on the floor. The whole thing, right? And Meadow acts all coy. Oh, I had no idea. I don't know what happened. Blah blah blah. And it's total BS, right? And so she tries to weasel her way out of it, and was like, I'm going to self-impose. It's like with the college basketball teams, and I'm going to self-impose sanctions on myself because like as if we're so righteous and noble because we're punishing ourselves, kind of admitting guilt, I guess. And she's like, oh, you can take away my MX for 3 weeks or my Discover card for 3 weeks, as if that at all is a right punishment. Like, she had a party where someone could have died. As much as she can say, oh, well, this person brought over these friends. It's like, no, but you hosted the party. It was your house. You could have gotten them out of there, whatever. But she didn't, We see that a couple times where she does things and kind of pleads ignorance. Like, I had no idea. It wasn't my fault. And, Tony and Meadow kind of let her off the hook. And she can get away with it because she's high achieving. We see that a lot where kids get away with, murder, metaphorically, because they're high achieving. And high achieving kids know this. They know they can get away with stuff because they're smart, because they do all these logistical things where everything's fine, right? But it's not. So we see that where we see a conversation where Tony and Carmela are like, she knows. I think she knows that she can get away with whatever. We have no control over her. Like, we have to pretend as if like there is some power here. Because when kids are starting to get teenagers, parents get scared because they realize, shit, we can't control these kids. They're going to do whatever they want because they're older. They have access to money, access to cars, like all that stuff, right? So anyway, I thought that was a really funny conversation where they're like, she's going to know that we're powerless. And, they kind of impose, quote unquote, like punishment on her. But it's not really punishment. It's not anything special. So anyway, that's the issue we see with Meadow, where she gets away with a lot too. Like their punishment isn't at all strict enough. They still let her go out. They still let her do stuff. Oh well, I need money for gas. How am I supposed to pay for gas? Okay, I guess we'll give you $100 or whatever, right? And you know damn well that she's not buying gas. They were just too lazy to be involved. Where it's like, actually, I will take you to school. I will put gas in the car myself. You're not getting any money for whatever, right? So their punishments aren't nearly strict enough. They're just not. And the way you see it is with AJ, and Tony, and especially when Tony and Carmela are apart. When they're separated, there's not great parenting going on. There's not really any consequences. I mean, you see Tony getting AJ a car, and then for despite getting in trouble at school, and Carmela calls him on it, like, what the hell is this? Like, you bought him a car, and then Tony is like, oh yeah, you can get this car when you get up to a C or whatever it is. And the way that they discipline also, again, especially with AJ, is through violence. you see a ton of violence, a ton of cursing, bad language. You see it a ton, right? Where the kids mouth back, or they do something wrong, and Tony flies off the handle, or even Carmela curses at them. Carmela never gets. I don't say never. I don't think we really see Carmela get physically violent with the kids, but there are moments where she will swear and be very, very cutting, and like even chase after AJ, or like So she doesn't hit anybody, but hit the kids rather. But she does bring in that hostility, that anger. That to me is pretty scary, pretty unhealthy, not very measured. I know shit happens, like stuff like that happens. We're not going to be all saints. I swear plenty on this video, but it's to where she's saying things that are like a little bit out of line, and it doesn't create a great environment. Not to mention Tony, especially very violent, and very violent with AJ. Slapping him, throwing him, grabbing him, hitting him, and there's no excuse for it. There's no excuse for that. It is abuse. I mean, it is. It's physical abuse. It's assault. He assaults his son many times, and we see it throughout. I mean, shit. Like there was an instance where, it's at the end of the series, right, where shit's going down. Their lives are in danger. He just had attempted suicide. AJ did, right? Well, oh yeah. Also, we'll discuss that in a sec. But he attempts suicide, and then a week later, whatever it was, there's a war going on with the families, and Tony's trying to say, "Hey, we need to get out of here right now." AJ's still sad and depressed, and he drags him by his collar and throws him and says, "Go pack." And anyway, it's just kind of pervasive throughout the series that Tony uses violence to say what he needs to get across, to get a point across. Picking AJ up, slapping him in the head, cursing at him, using really derogatory language towards him all the time. So it's tough to watch, honestly. And so, plenty of times he slaps AJ. That's really unfortunate, right? So, yeah. And AJ, the thing is, when you act like that towards your kid, internalizes that. There's a terrible sense of self-esteem, because it's like, wow, like, my parent. That's the thing, is kids view their parents so highly. Like, this is a person that's supposed to love me. This is the one person in the world that is supposed to be my cheerleader, my safe space, my protector. And when they're not, it hurts. It hurts a lot, because parents are supposed to be a safe place, and when they're not, it hurts. And so, that's partly why AJ acts out, is because of Tony. If Tony had been a good guy, if Tony had been nonviolent, if Tony had been solid, like, AJ wouldn't be acting the way he is. Yeah, and plenty of kids act out when their parents aren't, parents are saints, but I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of monkey see, monkey do within their relationship, for sure. And you see the disrespect that AJ shows towards Carmela. Saying shut up or whatever. That's also an issue that needs to be addressed. And you see it too. Like, I don't think Tony really treats Carmela that well. So that has to, kind of go down the line, right? But anyway, their discipline is not really great. It's not consistent, as I mentioned. Like, you see Carmela, I'm the prison warden, as I mentioned earlier. And so she's seen as really harsh and authoritarian, and then you see Tony is very permissive, where anything kind of goes, right? Oh, he's just a kid. Boys will be boys. I did worse when I was kids. And, like when AJ gets drunk and goes to the hotel room and gets his eyebrows shaved off and all that. And he just gets away with it, right? And so that's kind of the issue, is that like Tony lets a lot of stuff slide. And Carmela's 100% correct. 100% correct. And I think Carmela, she feels the way a lot of mothers feel, where the father's emotionally uninvolved. She cares. She has to be the one to instill discipline, and the fathers don't give a damn. They're not there supporting. They're not there lending a hand, to kind of, as I said, be a united front. They don't know because they weren't. They weren't shown when they were kids. So it's just a huge cycle where, Tony doesn't know how to be a really great father because his father wasn't a good father, and it's just a cycle, right? So I understand Carmela's frustration, where she doesn't want to have to be the bad guy, and it's true, 100% true. But Tony misunderstands, like, I can't be, I have to be the bad guy, and bad guy means let me punch my son, or let me scream and curse at my son. It's like, no, like, discipline is not about violence. Discipline is about, setting up boundaries and consequences. And for the record, I'm not an expert on being a parent, but these are some things that we know are helpful. So, at any rate, inconsistent discipline, definitely an important thing, right? The last one, sweet moments and memories in love. All of this, kind of the good stuff, right, is definitely a big factor. And that's what makes, as I said, Tony very complex, is the fact that on one hand, you see him flying off the handle and throwing AJ and slapping him and all this stuff, right? And then there are some moments where Tony and AJ get along, where they are really like, sweet with each other. Where Tony asks him, hey, you want to get some ice cream? Or, hey, you want to do this? Where he sits on his bed and where he brings him a pizza, where he hugs him or, saves him. Because, like, that's, Tony and Meadow aren't, okay, let's just talk about that. Tony and Meadow do have good moments too, right? Like the college episode, that's a really sweet moment where, there are sweet moments in that episode where Tony brings her to dinner and they're honest with each other. And, they kind of have this understanding of like, you're a good kid. I know you're a good kid. I'm just looking out for you. That sort of thing, right? So, it's a good place that they get to where they're honest and, she's like, Dad, are you in the mafia? That sort of stuff, right? Really funny stuff. But, they're not necessarily as close as Tony and AJ, and there's plenty of gender dynamics at play where the father-son relationship is so different than the mother-son relationship or even the mother-daughter relationship. And, as I said, vice versa, whatever. So it's just different. It's just a different sort of thing, because the father has to be a role model or has to be, like a role model, teach the son how to live, because that's like, hey, that's my gender, you're my gender. Now I must teach you how to be an example for being a man, sort of thing, right? So it's a different sort of relationship for sure. Just looking over everything, like there are a lot of like really nice family moments, right? Where we saw at the end of season 1, where there's a blackout and all that, and they're having dinner at Vesuvio, and it's like candlelit, and Tony gives a toast. Like this is what it's all about right here. It really sets up the series. It's a really sweet moment. Tony has this charm about him, this aura, this riz, where he's good with his words. You can't deny that the guy's charismatic, right? So yeah, plenty of moments, Christmas where they get each other gifts and it's all happy-go-lucky, and all these different family moments where, they're together and having a good time. That's the thing about Italian culture. They do have strong families. So, family dinner, fun stuff. They're laughing together, barbecues, Carmela's dad's birthday, where they're spending time together and they're very sweet. Like, you can't deny, I guess this kind of goes up to, the whole thing in general. Like, you can't deny that Tony and Carmela love their children. Like, they care about them very much. It just comes out in these shitty ways from time to time, right? I won't describe them as neglectful. I don't necessarily think they're always neglectful. They definitely could be, very authoritarian and not really care, but they do have conversations with them from time to time. They do come to their room and ask, "Hey, what's up?" Like, that sort of thing. They don't just ignore things per se. But every season's different. And there's plenty of bad stuff that happens, but there are some good moments, and so that really makes it difficult to judge them, because it's like, yeah, like they do try their best. It's and being a parent is hard, especially when their parents are bad people. I mean, Tony's father died like a little bit ago, whenever that was, and then his mom is the worst person ever. Carmela's parents are fine, but there's still plenty that's not good there. So, and two seminal moments to kind of describe how hard it is to be a parent. I mean, let's just say both for AJ and for Meadow. The first one, let's just talk about AJ. So, we see it in season 6, right, where AJ meets this girl, starts to see her, really likes her, and then proposes to her, and then, he gets dumped and becomes suicidal, and eventually tries to commit suicide. And, attempts suicide. He has to take, an attempt on his own life, right? And you see that, and Meadow comes to them, was like, "Hey, like, AJ's, like, saying things he's never said before, like, it kind of worries me, because it reminds me of when my roommate was suicidal. She was saying the same things, right?" So anyway, we see, kind of this rapid, I don't know if rapid decline is the right word, but we see AJ kind of go down the spiral where he gets dumped, and then after that he's super sad and depressed, and then eventually tries to take his own life. And talk about a hard thing to deal with, right? Like, shit, like, a son attempting suicide, that's as low as it can get, aside from your son dying. And so, and they're there for him. And that's something that, they're there, they bring him to, the hospital, and they do therapy with him. So they do care, they do care about him. They go to therapy with him, even if it's not, like, amazing. But that's something that they really hadn't anticipated. And, it's a tough thing for a family to go through, for a marriage to go through, when their son, kind of fails to launch, fails to leave the house, to get a job, to go to college, for that matter. It's something hard to deal with, for sure. But, they kind of, I don't know if they kind of weather the storm, but then the war happens and everyone starts dying, so we don't really get to see it. But I will say the cool moment, kind of like we saw in the first season when they have dinner together, like, there's a massive question of, like, oh, does Tony die in the final scene? But, the final scene we kind of see, like, Made in America, like, that's cool, is they're all there together eating dinner. That's kind of the vibe, right? Like, they're there eating dinner, and, as much as their families had problems and they've had spats or whatever, like, the final scene of the show is them spending it together. Like, I think that's symbolic of, everything they've gone through, all that, right? So I also think another important thing to remember in parenting is just it's the simplest thing. The simplest thing that means the most is just showing up. Showing up for a kid means everything. We see it a couple times with Tony and, both Meadow and AJ, where, this is kind of early season stuff, where he shows up. He is there for them at their sports games. He watches, AJ and, is cheering them on. Same thing with Meadow. Even go as far as, threatening the soccer coach, like I kind of mentioned. But we also see kind of the negative effects of when Tony doesn't show up, because we see it where, he shows up for AJ with football, but then AJ has a swim meet and Tony's not there and his mom's there. And so AJ says, "Oh, like, where's Dad?" And she's like, "Oh, he'll come to the next one, like next season, next year." And so you can see AJ's like, "Oh, okay, like, whatever." And kids want to pretend, they want to play it off like, "Oh yeah, it's not a big deal. I didn't really need him there. Like, whatever, not a big deal." But it is a big deal. Like, it does matter. It does hurt. And that's the thing about being a kid. Like, what's the percentage of kids that not only go on to play high school sports, but go on to play college sports, then go on to play major league sports? It's absolutely nothing. It is infinitesimal. It is so small. But everyone plays sports when they're a kid. And every kid should have their parent there to support them at their games. Everyone remembers when their parents are there for their games or not. Like, it matters. That stuff matters. And it's funny as a parent, like, "Oh, well, why would I want to go see this kid's game? He sucks. He's terrible." It don't matter. It don't matter if they're good or not. It just matters if you're there. Like, that's all they care about. That's all, I was talking from my own experience. Like, that's all I cared about. I knew I wasn't going to the league. I knew I wasn't going to be an overall, first overall pick. Like, I knew I wasn't going to be an amazing baseball player, but when my dad's there in the stands watching and cheering, like, that matters. Think about even, any other thing where you have to be in the stands watching. Dance recitals, ballet, whatever, singing, art shows. All that stuff matters. And so, anyways, in The Sopranos, we see that a couple times where Tony has a chance to be a father, and he doesn't take the opportunity. We even saw this with where Tony makes these racist remarks against Meadow's boyfriend, and then Carmela is like, "Hey, I'm going to the city. Do you want to come or do you want to watch the football game?" And Tony, being his stubborn self, says, "No, I'm just going to stay at home and watch the football game." So that, you talk about bids for affection, right? That's a big common thing, is these things called bids. We'll get into it later, but the fact that there was a bid there was a chance, an opportunity for connection, and he chose to just sit on his ass and watch the football game. It was a big opportunity for him to have an olive branch to kind of ease tensions, and he didn't take it, and that's a big score against him, right? So we see that throughout with Tony, that Carmela's there. Carmela's there for a lot of things. She's always helping out with dinner. She's always doing X, Y, and Z thing, and Tony doesn't show up. Sometimes he does, but sometimes he doesn't. And even if he may show up, he leaves early. There's plenty of times where he leaves dinner early to go attend the business and go do who knows what, right? And so that's the issue with Tony, is that he's inconsistent as a father, and that's the issue. You might say, "Oh, well, he does all these great things." Well, yeah, he does just as many, if not more, equally worse things. So you can't say that he's this great guy, when in reality he's really not. He's a lot more complex, and if anything, he's more bad than good, unfortunately. So that's been the whole parenting shebang. There's plenty to say more about parenting throughout, but hopefully I was able to kind of get it all. The point is, it's hard, it's difficult for anybody. I'm not an expert. And certainly they aren't experts, but it's hard, and they were trying their best. They're doing the best with what they were given and how they were parented. But I guess the point is, like, even if you came from a household that was tough, like, you got to be able to handle the tough moments and be able to adjust and be a good parent, be the best parent you can be. I mean, that's what you owe to your children, is to be, to kind of right the wrongs of the past. And it's a lot of pressure. If, Tony, like, he doesn't know how to open up emotionally, but he has to. Something you should have done a long time ago. But, you don't know what you don't know, so it's tough. And I give every parent out there a lot of credit. Like, it's a thankless job. It's an unrelenting job. But, someone's got to do it. And that's your responsibility as a parent.